So, happy Father's Day. I saw that yesterday going around online. And of course, not all dads are like that. Like many dads know their kids' birthdays. Ben, I'm sure you know Luke's birthday. Right? Yeah, okay. Just checking. Sorry to put you on the spot. But happy Father's Day, everyone. And I saw that going around. I just thought it's worth a good laugh. It's one of those things we can do. We can laugh at each other and, oh, that poor dad. So good. Well, hey, good to see you. My name is Matt. If we haven't met, welcome to Reunion, but I'm pretty sure I've met everyone here. Right at 10 o'clock, it was just the band and Melinda and myself, and we were considering going out for breakfast. So it's good to see everybody here. Welcome. We are jumping into another parable of Jesus. So the last number of weeks, we have been looking at different stories Jesus told. So parables are stories, different stories Jesus told. And he used them as a way of teaching and instructing. And so we're looking at another one this morning. So Matthew chapter 25 is where we're hanging out today. So you can grab your app or Bible, whatever you have. It's going to be on the screen as well. As per usual, I will walk us through it, and then we'll chat a little bit together. So far, we've looked at parables on what does it mean to have inner heart transformation, and we asked the question, so how's your soul? We also talked about what does it mean for the banquet host or the party planner, the one who's throwing the party, to make enough available space to welcome everyone around the table. And then last week we talked about what does it mean to love God and love others with the hinge on who is my neighbor. And we talked about the idea that loving others and loving your neighbor, there is no disclaimer that leaves a certain segment of the population out. When we say we love God and we love others, it means we include everyone in what that means. And so today we're continuing kind of in these teachings, and Jesus is hanging out with his disciples. And in Matthew's gospel, this is towards the end of Jesus' life and teaching and ministry. This is before he is arrested. So he's starting to talk about the end. And so his friends, his disciples, his followers are starting to ask these questions, trying to understand, well, what do you mean about the end? What's going to be happening? They're super curious. And so Jesus is giving these teachings on the kingdom and what that all looks like. And that's kind of where we're picking up the story. So Matthew chapter 25. Let's read this together. Beginning at verse 14. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven, because he's been talking about this in the previous verses. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by a story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. So when we travel, I don't know what you have to do, if you have to find someone to dog sit, or I'm not sure what that looks like for you as you prepare to go. Say you're going for a long time. What are those things that you need to check off? So for us, we made the mistake once of going away and never arranging anyone to water our plants. And I remember we were gone for 2 or 3, I guess it was about 3 weeks. And we realized when we were gone, oh, this is gonna be trouble. And we came home and all our flower beds were dead one summer. Everything that we had planted. And generally it's kind of that stuff. Do we have a pet we have to look after? Is someone gonna come house sit? We're gonna look after our plants. But in first century context, it was very common for people who were wealthy. So this man is wealthy. The very fact that he has possessions and money to hand out and entrust to someone else is an indicator of his wealth. So it'd be very common for those wealthy people who are going on prolonged trips to find trusted people to look after their possessions. And so the word that is used when it says entrust, it means handing over the things that are most important. So he's handing over these important things that are part of who he is to these trusted servants. And he's going on this trip. And notice it says, according to their ability. So he has some way of kind of gauging the level of competency, let's say, of the different people he's entrusting. And he gives them according to their competency. So to one man, in other translations, it's called the talents, which is a unit of measurement. This is a parable of the talents. But in this translation, it just uses bags of silver as a monetary amount. So to one trusted person, it's 5 bags, another 2, another 1, and then he heads off on his trip. Now, I don't know if these servants were in communication or aware of what's going on. I don't know if one is like, wait, you got 5? I only got 1. I don't know if there's any of that dynamic going on. But he's dividing up some of his possessions here and handing them off. And this is what it says. It says, verse 16, then the servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. So the money's handed over, and immediately the first two, the one who received the 5 and the one who received the 2, get to work. So they're investing it, they're creating other opportunities to see return, reward. They're putting the money to work, they're using it. It's been entrusted to them, and now they're stewarding it and using it for the benefit of their master. So they're at it. And then the third guy kind of takes a different approach. He's like, I'm going to bury it. I'm going to hide it. I'm going to keep it safe. No one will know where it is. I'm just going to lock it down and hide it out. So immediately the first two kind of get rolling, and the third guy's response is, I'm going to hide this stuff. Verse 19, after a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used the money. So it's like he's back in town, and now he wants to, like, show me the money. What have you done? Bring it back. What's going on with it? And he's kind of taking account, taking stock here. So the servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Or another translation where instead of saying let's celebrate together, it says come share in your master's happiness. Like let's join together and celebrate. Let's party. You've done such a great job. Now the second servant, verse 22, the servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Again, come and share in your master's happiness. Let's celebrate together. So I can, like in my mind's eye as I meditate on this, I can picture that this is unfolding and the last guy is watching what's happened and the returns that are coming back, this doubling effect that everyone else has achieved. And I can imagine like this is where, like if it was me, the back sweats are starting to happen. You know you're going to have to give an answer publicly, and what are you going to do? When I was in grade 7 and 8, I had the same French teacher both years, Mr. Berescu. We called him Mr. B, and I wasn't great in French. I passed, but I wasn't very great. And we used to do this thing in school, I'm not sure if they still do it, where you'd write a test, and then you'd pass it like 2 desks back and maybe 1 over, and then you'd mark each other's tests. I always felt like it was if you're a teacher, maybe that's still what you do, but I always felt like that's the laziest possible solution is to use class time to mark each other's tests. And I also felt like deep shame of being like everyone else, or at least that one student seeing my test. And I remember he felt, I think, that public shaming was like a motivator to do well in French. So often he would say, he'd kind of go like, question 4, it is this. Did everyone get that? Throw up your hand if your test says that. So people would throw up their hand. And he'd be like, well, who didn't get that? So then the person who's 2 back from me and 1 over would put up their hand. And then he'd say, well, whose test are you marking? And it'd be like, Matt's. So I kind of had this thing where I'm like, oh, these tests are the worst because everyone is going to know how little I have done, even though I was trying my best. And I feel like this third servant who's been given this 1 bag of silver is watching these other 2 people like throw up their hands. Hey, I did this for you. It's great. We're all good. And the master's like, hey, come share in your master's happiness. Let's celebrate together. Well done. Knowing that, okay, now I'm next to share what's going on. And so this is what he says. Verse 24, then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit any of my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. So in this kind of interesting dynamic, this guy is trying to explain his actions. And if you kind of think about it, he's kind of blaming the master or his impression of who the master is. So his impression of the master is that he's tough, he's ruthless, and so fear was his motivator. And so because he was afraid, he hid the money. Now, he gave him everything back that he got. It's not like he had lost the whole amount or squandered it. He gave him exactly back what he had been entrusted with, but he hadn't done anything with it. And he gets called out for that. And the funds he did have were given to the one who had proven and shown the ability to make it stretch and grow. And then it ends, the story from Jesus ends this way. He says, to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even with what little they have, or even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Whew. Heavy ending. So Jesus is using this story. His disciples are like, so what is happening? What's the kingdom going to be like? When it's all going to end? And Jesus, instead of answering that, like he often does, he doesn't give a direct answer. He launches into this story about this man who goes away and leaves his servants, those he trusts, in charge until he comes back and takes account. Okay, let's pause there. It is about 5 to 11, so let's take 5 or 6 minutes to chat about it. If you've never been with us before like this, just circle up, have a conversation. What stands out to you? What do you find curious? Or what questions come up? Specifically, what are maybe some things, some transferable principles from this story that Jesus was telling his followers then that might be important for us as followers of Jesus today to pay attention to? So put on some music, you can grab a coffee if you don't want to do it, but spend a few minutes talking, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and conversation together. All right? Go for it. I think week one, when we started talking about the parables of Jesus, we started with the heart posture thing because I think that's super, super important to anything that we talk about when it comes to Jesus and his teachings and the posture and position of our heart. I think it's the most important thing. Jesus calls out over and over in his teachings that you can do all these things, follow all these rules and regulations, but if your heart posture isn't in the right place, then all of that's for naught. It's all a waste. I feel like the third servant, if he tried, or any of them, if they tried and lost it, say, I wish that character was in the story, that they tried and lost it all, but they really, really tried and their heart was in the right place. My understanding of who Jesus is that he would have been like, well done, you kind of made some missteps, but your choice erred on the side of love, which we talked about last week. If in doubt, why don't we always err on the side of love? If we're not really sure, err on the side of love. I think what God wants us to do is be a people, as Mark, you pointed out, okay, the things that have been entrusted to us, regardless of how we interpret the different characters in the story, if we just think, if everything is a good gift, if everything is given to us, whatever it is, whether it's like we feel like it's a one-bag portion of gifts, or a 5 or a 10 or 100, whatever that looks like for you if you were to do a self-evaluation, what are you doing with the things that have been entrusted to you? There's a show we used to watch when we were kids. I don't even know if it's still on, but it was called Tiny Talent Time. I think CHCH did it. Do you guys know this show? So I couldn't find like a version of the show from when I watched it. This is like a way earlier picture. But when I watched it, it was like in color. I'm old. I'm not that old. These kids or people would come on the show, and it was really cheesy, really terrible. And they would say like, hey, Timmy, what are you going to do today? And you'd be like, I'm going to tap dance. And then they'd like go through the whole thing. It was just it was like a low budget, really cheesy version of America's Got Talent, which I also think is a really super cheesy show. It just has a huge budget, but you may be a fan. But it was this idea of like, here's the things I have, and I'm going to show them to the world. I'm going to use them. I think I have this gift. And when I think about that show, the one thing I like is that whether they had an accurate picture of who they were or not, they wanted to kind of go with it. They felt like, this is what I have. I'm going to use it. I'm going to do it. I feel like as followers of Jesus today, that is the call. So what have you been entrusted with? What has God given to you? What are those resources, talents, strengths, abilities? What are those things that make you you, who God has created you to be? And how are you using those things for the purpose and the betterment of something greater than yourselves? What does that look like? Because we all would believe that as we follow Jesus, our call then is to get involved in kingdom activity. When we see the work of God around us, our call then is to get involved in those places and those things. I found this quote that I really like. Stanley Hauerwas says this. He says, Jesus' disciples are not called to do great things. That's not the call. Although great things may happen. Rather, Jesus' disciples are called to do the work that Jesus has given us to do. Work as simple and as hard as learning to tell the truth and to love our enemies. Such work is the joy that our Master invites us to share. So sometimes I feel like unless we know it's going to be a great thing, we just don't do it. But that's not the call. That's not what being faithful and using the things that God has given us to do, that's not what it looks like. I have a friend named Roger who's a barber. He became a barber like, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And he obviously doesn't know I'm telling this story or whatever. Maybe just don't, if you know him, don't shout it out too quickly or anything. But so Roger became this barber. He changed careers. He felt like he really wanted to do this. He is like, if he cuts your hair, he just like asks you questions. It's like therapy session in the chair kind of guy. And some may say, well, like you cut hair or what are you going to do? But Roger has always found these amazing ways to take his love of interacting with people and making them feel good with a good haircut and having these encouraging conversations. You always leave his chair encouraged. And say, how can I use maybe this little thing? So he did this thing with a friend of his named Jordan who runs a tattoo shop. And they ran this out of the cold fundraiser this past year where you could come in and get like a flash tattoo or a haircut. And all the proceeds went to help homeless people. And I felt like it was such a cool example of just, you could look and say like, well, how much did they really raise? Did they raise a few $1,000s, a few $100? Is it really worth it? Did it really make a difference? But it does make a difference. It's like, here's who I am, my care for people, my love for people. Here's what I love to do. How can I use it to serve and to love God and to love others? And I just love that story. I love what he does because he's always finding these creative ways in just who he is. So my encouragement to us to think about for us as a church, especially as we're heading in a couple weeks into the summer months where we're all over the place doing our things, is what are those things that make you you? Those things that just bring you to life. And what does it look like for you to use those things to not only to love God, but to love other people? It could be as simple as, you know what, I love to cook food, and so we're going to be really intentional with our home and our backyard and our space and let people know that they matter and they're cared for and they're welcomed at our table. It could be that you have been blessed in some other way or have this other gift or talent or whatever you want to use, whatever phrase you want to use, and you're like, I could use it in this way to serve other people. It's an expression of my love for God by the way I love and care for the people around me. And I'm not going to bottle it down or hide it up. I'm going to say, here it is, it's available, and I want to use it. So what are those things for you? What does that look like for you? And what would it look like if we say, over the summer, we're going to be intentional to apply ourselves, not to put in the hole like Mark said, but to say, hey, it's available. If I consider everything as a gift, how do I then return it back and say, God, this is not only as a way for me to love you, but also to demonstrate that love by the way I use it to love and care for others. So we're going to take a minute. The crew's going to come back up and lead us. I just want to give you a minute to pause and reflect and to pray. And then communion is all on this side. We only set up one station because we figured that was just a lot easier for us this morning. And so I'm going to be serving right here. Just come forward at any point as we sing. But let me just give you a moment, and then I'll close in prayer, and Riley and crew will be up. So God, sometimes we look at who we are and what we have available to use, and it feels like not enough or insignificant. It feels like it can't really make a difference, and no one would really care. So if that's one of my sisters or brothers, if that's one of the places they would say they're in right now, and if they're honest with themselves, would you encourage them by your Holy Spirit that who they are is enough, and they are who you've created them to be? And give them a picture and an encouragement, a vision of what it means to just be themselves fully as they love you and love others, and push them forward in that, give them opportunity in that. For those who have been maybe entrusted with different kinds of gifts or talents where the world may say it's worth more, God, I pray for humility for those brothers and sisters, that we recognize that we are no better than anyone else. But the things that we've been entrusted with, we also need to steward really well and be careful with and be generous with and extend those to other people. So God, we're into this, heading into this season where there's going to be travel and vacation and many things happening. Keep it top of mind for us about the posture of our heart, the position of our heart, and that the way we love and treat other people is a reflection of our commitment to follow you, Jesus. And help us to be honest with that and not hypocritical in that. God, we love you and we need to love others. So teach us what that means as we extend ourselves and steward the gifts and opportunities and things you've entrusted to us. We come to the table now with hope and expectation Thanking you that you meet us here. Thanking you that through your death and resurrection, we have hope and identity. Through your broken body and shed blood, you make us who we are and welcome us back around the table. God, thank you for forgiveness that is offered through the cross and hope that we see in light of the resurrection. Amen.